The smell of the station was the first thing Rail Doss had learned to ignore. Every species on Halo 7 brought something with them. The Kethari smelled like dry stone after rain. The Dovin engineers smelled faintly of machine oil and something sweet that nobody had ever been able to name. The recycled air mixed all of it together into something that had no name of its own. Rail had stopped noticing it after the third week. What he had not stopped noticing was the way the Kethari looked at the training ring. The ring was tucked into the far end of the human residential module. It was not beautiful. It was a sealed cylinder of reinforced composite, bolted to a rotating collar that kept it spinning at exactly the right speed. 1 standard gravity. 9.8 meters per second squared. The same pull that had shaped every bone and muscle and tendon in Rail's body over 38 years of living on Earth and working in deep space mines where the artificial gravity was kept high to prevent bone loss. It was not a special place. It was just a room that felt like home. Rail was running laps when the observation group arrived. He saw them through the reinforced window without slowing. 6 Kethari, led by a diplomat named Garo, who walked like he was always being watched and enjoyed it. 2 junior aides, a compact station guide with a data tablet. They had been scheduled for the standard orientation tour, which included a brief look at the human module. Rail had been informed. He had not changed anything about his schedule. Inside the ring, Liz was finishing a set of deadlifts in the far corner. She was 26, quiet by habit, and built like someone who had spent her whole life doing exactly what she was doing now. The bar she was lifting held 4 plates on each side. She pulled it up, held it, set it down, and reached for her water. Outside, through the window, Garo said something to his aide. Both of them looked at Liz. The aide's eyes were wide. Garo's were not, they were narrow, in the way that meant he had already decided what he was looking at. Rail finished his lap and slowed near the window. He could not hear the conversation outside through the composite wall, but he had been on this station long enough to read Kethari expressions. Garo's mouth was moving with the careful shape of someone making a clever observation for an audience. The guide opened the module door. The group stepped in just far enough to see the ring from the entrance corridor. The guide explained that the ring operated at Earth's standard gravity, that humans used it daily, that entry was restricted to trained personnel. Garo looked at Rail through the inner window. He said, loudly enough that the translation earpiece caught it, "And they do this by choice?" His aide laughed, a short sound, quickly covered. Rail pressed the comm button on the wall panel. His voice came through the corridor speakers, calm. "Every morning. Twice on Fridays." Garo blinked. He had not expected to be heard. He recovered quickly, the way diplomats do. "Impressive dedication," he said, "for a species so recently arrived in the compact." Rail said, "Thank you." He turned away and went back to his lap. Behind him, he heard the guide explaining that the floor material was rated for heavy impact loads. He heard Garo's aide ask if the structure was safe for the rest of the station. The guide gave a number, a rating, something about load tolerance. Rail let it go and kept running. Liz finished her set. She stripped the outer plates off the bar, stacking them against the wall bracket with the automatic habit of someone who had done it 10,000 times. The last plate, the outermost, caught the lip of the bracket wrong. It didn't fall far. It tipped off the bar, hit the floor edge first, and rolled 2 meters before settling flat. The floor beneath the impact point showed a shallow dent. Hairline. Not a crack, not a failure. Just a mark. The kind of mark the ring floor collected over months of use. Rail stopped running. He walked over to the spot, crouched, and pressed his thumb into the dent. Clean compression. The composite had not fractured, it had simply moved slightly under point load stress and not moved back. Normal. Expected. Recorded in the maintenance log every quarter. He stood and took out his small field notebook. He wrote the location, the size, the date. He did this without thinking much about it. He looked up. Through the window, the Kethari group was already moving on. Garo was saying something again, gesturing at the ceiling rather than the ring. The guide was nodding. The aide had stopped looking through the window entirely. Rail looked at the dent again. He thought about what that plate weighed. He thought about what it meant that the floor recorded every contact with the truth of how much force had passed through it. He thought about Garo's voice, the lightness in it, the certainty. He closed his notebook. He thought, it would not always be a weight plate that made the point. He went back to his run, and the ring turned, and the floor held everything it was given without complaint or announcement. Outside, the corridor was already quiet. The Kethari had moved on to the next module. The dent stayed where it was. The briefing room on Deck 6 had been built for function, not comfort. Compact standard design, pale composite walls, a long oval table made of layered lightweight panels, articulated chairs that could adjust for 3 different body types. The lighting was flat and even. The air cycled every 4 minutes. There was a screen at one end and a small refreshment unit at the other that no one ever used because no 2 species on the station agreed on what counted as refreshable. Rail had been in this room 14 times since arriving on Halo 7. He knew which chair wobbled, which section of the table had a dead spot on the embedded data surface, and exactly how long it took for the air recycler to remove the smell of Kethari stress pheromones from the air when a meeting went badly. He sat down on the human side. Liz sat next to him with her standard issue field binder dense recycled paper, metal rings, a dark cover scuffed at all 4 corners. She set it on the table. Then she set her data pen on top of it. The pen was a human spec writing tool, steel barrel, weighted for use in variable gravity environments, about the length of her hand and a good deal heavier than it looked. Across the table, Garo settled into his chair and arranged a thin Kethari data slate in front of him. His 2 aides flanked him quietly. Commander Oru sat at the head of the table. Kethari, senior fleet officer, a face that gave very little away most of the time. Admiral Vorn sat 2 seats down, the highest-ranked compact official on the station, a Thovan with pale coloring and the very careful stillness of someone who had spent decades learning not to react to things before he had thought about them. Captain Soraya represented the human contingent on the other side. She had a data tablet and a cup of something hot that she did not touch. The review was a standard readiness briefing. Rail was there because his training program was on the agenda line item 7, near the bottom. He had prepared 2 pages of summary notes. He expected to speak for 4 minutes. The first 40 minutes went without incident. Then Liz leaned forward to pull a printed summary sheet from across the table. She stood slightly, reaching, her weight shifting, and the binder moved an inch, and the pen rolled. It went off the edge of the binder, off the edge of the table, 90 centimeters, straight down. The sound it made was not loud. It was a short, sharp crack, like a knuckle popping. Clean and final. Then there was no sound at all. The pen had gone through the table. Not chipped it. Not cracked it. Through it. The steel tip had punched a hole the diameter of a coin, edges pressed cleanly downward. The composite layer peeled back in a tight circle the way thin material does when something narrow and very heavy hits it fast from above. The pen hung for a half-second, caught by the slight friction of the hole's edge. Then it dropped to the floor below the table with a small secondary tap. Liz stared at the hole. Rail looked at it once. Then he leaned down, picked up the pen from the floor beneath the table, and put it in his breast pocket. He straightened. He folded his hands on the table. Garo had not moved. He was looking at the hole in the table with an expression that had lost all its earlier shape. The careful diplomat's arrangement of his features, the slight elevation of the chin, the composed brow, the thin suggestion of patience was simply gone. What was underneath? It was something Rail had not seen on Garo's face before. It was the look of a person recalculating. One of the aides had moved his chair back from the table. Not stood. Not run. Just moved. Slightly. Like a body making a small decision without fully consulting the mind above it. Bourne had not moved at all. He was looking at the hole. His expression was the one he used when he was working through something complicated and was not yet ready to show that it was complicated. Oru pulled a small measuring tool from his jacket. He reached across the table, without asking anyone's permission, and measured the hole. He looked at the measurement. He looked at the pen-shaped outline in Rail's breast pocket. He put the tool away. He said nothing. Rail said, "Sorry about the table. I'll file a replacement request this afternoon." His voice was flat and sincere and completely ordinary. The voice of someone apologizing for a minor inconvenience. Soraya, on his left, raised her cup. She took a slow sip of whatever was in it. Her eyes did not go to the hole. She had seen things like this before. She was leaving it to the room to absorb at its own speed. Garo found his voice after a moment. He said, Is that equipment standard issue?" Rail said, "Yes. Every human field officer carries one." Garo looked at the hole again. He looked at Rail's pocket. He said nothing further. The briefing continued. Nobody brought it up again. Line item 7 came and went. Rail spoke for 4 minutes. His notes were clear, and the summary was accepted. After the session ended and the room cleared, Oru stood at the table for a moment longer than necessary. He looked at the hole. He pressed one finger to the edge of it, testing the material, the way an engineer checks something he does not yet fully understand but intends to. Then he left. In the corridor outside, Garo walked alone. His aides were a step behind him, quiet. He looked down at his own hand as he walked, the long, thin fingers, the light frame, the hollow feel of bones built for a world that asked very little of the bodies it made. He did not look back at the briefing room, but he thought about the table for a long time after. Dreth filed the formal observation request at the start of the next duty cycle, before he had eaten breakfast or run his morning diagnostics on the cargo bay sensors he was supposed to be monitoring. He had been awake most of the night, not because of anything dramatic. He had not paced, had not argued with himself, had not done any of the things that stories say a person does when something shakes them. He had simply lain in his bunk and thought about force calculations until the lights shifted from sleep cycle blue to work cycle white. Dreth was a Thovan engineer. He understood mass. He understood velocity. He understood impact loading and material tolerance, and the way energy moved through a structure when something hit it wrong. These were not abstract ideas to him. They were his work, every day, on a station where a single failed coupling could vent a bay to vacuum. He thought he had understood mass. The pen had changed that. Not the event. He had seen the event, had processed it in real time, had noted it and filed it in the part of his mind that collects unusual data. What had changed things was what happened when he got back to his lab and ran the numbers. A standard human writing tool. Steel barrel. No modifications. No added weight. It had fallen less than 1 meter. The numbers were not wrong. He ran them 4 times. The composite table on Deck 6 was rated for standard compact equipment loads. The impact force from the falling pin had exceeded that rating by a factor of 3.1. Not because the pin was a weapon, not because it had been thrown, because it was heavy, and gravity on Earth was heavy, and humans built their tools to match the world they came from. He had then pulled up the specifications for standard human field equipment. He had been at his desk for 6 hours. He sent the meeting request at 0610. Rail arrived with lists. They came in without ceremony, the way people do when they are not sure what a meeting is for, but are willing to find out. Rail looked at the data on Dreth's screen, at the tables and calculations and the highlighted notation that said exceeds compact standard in red, and he sat down without comment. Dreth said, "I want to understand what you carry." Rail said, "All right." He emptied his pockets onto the bench. Not a performance, just a person removing the things he had placed in his pockets that morning because he needed them for his day. Multi-tool, folded 310 grams. Field blade 180 grams. Notebook with metal binder rings 600 grams. Water flask, full 750 grams. Compact trauma kit 900 grams. A second pen, same model as the one now logged in the incident report 95 grams. All of it sat on Dreth's bench in a loose row. Dreth looked at it. He picked up the water flask with both hands, which was the correct approach for something 750 grams. He looked at Rail. Rail had picked it up with one hand, without thought, when he set it down. Dreth said, "You carry this every day." Rail said, "That's a light day. I leave out the emergency rations and the backup torch when I'm staying on station." Dreth put the flask down carefully. He added up the numbers on his display. Just under 3 kilograms of incidental carry weight. Not tools for a specific task. Just the things Rail thought he might need. He carried them the way a Kethari diplomat carried a data slate without thinking about it, because the weight was simply not something he noticed. Dreth asked if they would come to the observation deck above the training ring. They agreed. Liz ran her standard afternoon session while Dreth watched from the alcove above. He had his notebook. He wrote in it steadily. He watched her load the carry bar plates added one by one until the total weight was 140 kilograms, and then pick it up and walk with it across the ring floor. Not slowly, not with great visible effort, not with the posture of someone doing something exceptional. She walked. She talked briefly to another trainee midway across. She turned and walked back. Dreth wrote, 140 kilograms. Walking pace. Conversational. No support structure. He underlined it. Then he underlined it again. He asked Rail, "What is the purpose of this training?" Rail leaned on the rail and watched Liz reset the bar. So you can do your job when things go wrong. What kind of job requires this? Any of them. In the right circumstances. Dreth thought about that. He thought about the right circumstances, the way a station could change in seconds, the way a corridor that was safe became a problem, the way weight and leverage and the simple physics of a crisis did not care about species or rank. He thought about his own body, though Van Standard, built for low gravity, efficient, light, fragile in the ways that the compact's worlds had allowed it to be fragile because they had never needed it to be anything else. He thought about what 3 kilograms felt like as an accident. He thought about what 140 kilograms felt like as a normal Tuesday. When the session ended and Liz racked the bar, Dreth closed his notebook. He thanked Rail. He walked back to his lab. He sat at his desk for a moment and then opened a new document. He wrote the subject line first, revised assessment of human physical parameters urgent. Then he began writing, and he did not stop for a long time. And when he sent it to Commander Oru, the file was 11 pages long, and every number in it was correct. Garo called it a safety review. That was the formal name on the request document: Compact Safety Review, Human Equipment Standards on Multi-Species Installations. He had written it carefully, using the right language, the kind that sounded like procedure and not like a person who had been unsettled by a pin falling off a table and needed the station's formal structures to help him feel like he still understood the world. Oru had approved it without comment. He had also, quietly, asked Captain Soraya to attend, and Dreth, and Rail. The panel met in the main conference room on Deck 3, which was larger than the Deck 6 briefing room and had, Rail noticed, a much thicker table. He did not mention this. Garo sat at the panel end. 2 compact officials sat with him, a logistics officer and a station safety coordinator. They had data tablets and careful expressions. Rail sat on the opposite end with Soraya on his left and Dreth, who had been assigned as technical observer, off to the side with his notebook already open. The panel was not hostile. Garo had been too careful for that. It was the kind of proceeding that was not quite an accusation, but was wearing accusation's coat. The logistics officer read the incident summary from the Deck 6 meeting, the pen, the table, the hole, the incident log that Rail had filed that same afternoon as promised. She read it in the flat tone of someone who had decided the facts would do the work. Then Garo asked Rail to explain the pen. Rail explained the pen. Steel barrel. Standard human field equipment. No modifications. Produced by a manufacturer on Earth for use by field workers and military personnel who needed a writing tool that functioned in variable gravity environments. It was heavier than compact equivalents because it had been designed to be used by people whose hands were used to working against a stronger pull. Garo asked, "Was this typical of human equipment?" Rail said yes. Garo asked, "Was this typical of human physical parameters?" Rail paused here, not because he was uncertain, but because he wanted to say it correctly, and he had found, over time, that correct things said poorly did not stay correct in other people's minds. He said, humans had evolved on a planet with one standard gravity. Every system in the human body had been shaped by that fact over a very long time: bones, muscles, tendons, the heart, the way blood moved, the way lungs expanded. The baseline for a human was a world that pushed back. All of it, every part, had been built to operate under that constant load. He said, the compact's worlds were different. Lower gravity mostly. The species that lived on them had been shaped differently. There was nothing wrong with that. It was just physics and time. He said, humans trained not to maintain the gravity's baseline, but to exceed it. The training ring was not recovery. It was not therapy. It was work. Garo asked, why? If you already have the advantage, why increase it? Rail said, because the baseline is what gravity gave them. The training is what they chose to add. Those are different things. Gravity shaped them. They shaped the rest. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Captain Soraya spoke. She did it without standing, without raising her voice. She set her data tablet flat on the table, screen up, and said, I want to mention the Orvan border incident. The logistics officer looked at her tablet. The safety coordinator did too. Soraya said, during the Orvan border incident 14 months ago, a section of compact vessel Meridian 4 took structural damage during an emergency docking maneuver. An interior bulkhead collapsed partially, blocking the main evacuation corridor. 3 human crew members, not soldiers, not specialists, Regular crew held the bulkhead open by hand for 11 minutes while 46 compact personnel evacuated. She turned the tablet to face the panel. The structural report was on screen. The collapsed section weighed 1,400 kilograms. Partial collapse, so they weren't lifting the full weight, but they were holding a load of approximately 800 kilograms of shifting material against active pressure differential. She said this the way a person reads a maintenance log. Clean, factual, not proud. 11 minutes, she said. Nobody on that ship had trained for exactly that scenario. They just knew how to carry weight. Garo looked at the report. He did not reach for the tablet. His aides were very still. The safety coordinator wrote something down. The logistics officer looked at Dreth, who looked back, and then looked at his own notebook. The panel continued. There were more questions about storage protocols, equipment labeling for multi-species environments, whether human personnel should flag high-mass items in shared spaces. Rail answered all of them. He was helpful and specific. At the end, after the officials had gathered their tablets and Garo had nodded once at no one in particular and left, Oru stood next to Rail for a moment in the emptying room. He said, "Could humans train others? Other species?" Rail said, "Probably not. The physiology is too different to get the same results." Oru nodded. "But could they teach others how to work alongside humans? In physical situations?" Rail thought about it. "Yeah, that's doable. Knowing what the person next to you can do that's useful whether or not you can do it yourself." Oru said, "Write something up." He left before Rail could answer. Rail looked at the thick table for a moment. He knocked on it once with his knuckle. Solid. Better materials. He wondered if that had been deliberate. He picked up his notebook and went to find lists. The alarm came in the middle of nothing. Not during a drill, not during a shift change, not at any moment that would have made sense for something to go wrong. Rail and Liz were walking the connector corridor between the human module and the training ring. Liz was drinking from her water flask. Rail was reading something on his field tablet. The lights were standard white. The air smelled like recycled nothing. Then the emergency alarm cut through all of it, and the lights went red, and the station spoke in 5 languages at once. Bay 4, docking failure, pressure event, evacuate. They were 40 meters from Bay 4. Rail put his tablet away. Liz capped her flask. They moved. The bay doors were still open when they arrived. Manual override active. Station systems trying to talk to each other faster than the situation was developing. Through the porthole in the corridor wall, Rail could see the problem in 1 second. The cargo hauler had docked hard, a coupling had failed, and the inner seal on the bay's main access door had ruptured. The bay was losing pressure. Not catastrophically, not a full breach, but enough that every sensor in the system was screaming, and the people inside the bay were running for the emergency corridor in the back wall. 12 Kethari personnel. He counted through the porthole. All moving, none down. Good. The emergency bulkhead was not good. It had been triggered correctly. It was supposed to drop and seal the damaged section. It had dropped 60% of the way. Then the actuator had seized, probably because the coupling failure had sent a vibration through the structural frame that knocked the rail out of true, and now 900 kilograms of reinforced emergency panel was hanging at an angle in the doorway like a door that had been stopped by a foot. The gap it left was not enough. The 12 Kethari could not get through that gap without going one at a time, slowly, through a doorway with a failing seal and dropping atmospheric pressure, and the compact emergency team arriving from the other direction had exosuits. Yes, but the doorway geometry was wrong for the suits, and the leverage was wrong, and they were talking to each other in urgent tones about what to do next. Rail was already at the bay entrance. He looked at the bulkhead. He looked at where the actuator had seized top right. Mechanical failure. The panel was binding on its own track. It needed to be pushed down and laterally at the same time. Roughly 900 kilograms. Binding friction probably added another third to the effective resistance. He looked at Liz. She was already there. They went through the gap one at a time, Rail first, Liz behind him. The pressure drop was noticeable, not dangerous yet, but the kind that makes you breathe harder than normal. The floor of the bay was cold. The emergency lighting had kicked in. Rail got his hands on the bottom edge of the bulkhead panel, left side. Liz took the right. The emergency team outside was shouting something. Rail did not have time to translate it. He looked at Liz. She looked back. She nodded. They pushed. Not up, not sideways. Both at once down and inward, following the track direction, fighting the bind point at the top, where the rail had warped. The panel weighed what it weighed, and it did not care. It did not make accommodations. It held where it was, and they pushed against it, and nothing happened for 2 seconds, and then something happened a millimeter, a small grinding sound, the track catching a new point. Rail's shoulder did something it should not do. He felt it clearly and immediately, and then he pushed it back to the edge of his attention, because there was still a door to move. Liz made a sound that was not words. Her hands were bleeding. The edge of the panel was machine-cut composite, and composite edges are not soft. She did not stop. 10 centimeters. 20. 30. Enough. Go, Rail said, and his voice came out lower than he expected. The Kethari came through. Not panicking, they were trained. They knew how to move in an emergency, but fast, single file, crouched under the tilted panel that Rail and Liz were holding at the angle they had managed to force it to. 12. He counted again as they passed. 12. Good. The bay sealed itself 3 seconds after the last one cleared. The emergency bulkhead dropped the rest of the way on its own once the bind point released. The pressure equalized enough to let the actuator reset. The sound it made when it fully closed was enormous in the sudden quiet. Rail sat down on the floor of the corridor. Not a choice. His legs made the decision. His shoulder was wrong. He could feel the shape of what had happened in it, not a break, probably a tear, the kind that needed a medical bay and several weeks of pointed conversations with a physiotherapist. His hands were shaking slightly, which was adrenaline, and he knew that, and knowing it did not stop it. Liz sat next to him. Both her palms were dark and wet. She looked at them with the practical expression of someone assessing a maintenance problem. You okay? Rail asked. Hands are cut up, she said. You? Shoulders done something unfortunate. How unfortunate? Medical bay unfortunate. She nodded. She tore a strip from the hem of her inner shirt and wrapped her right hand with the automatic efficiency of someone who had been trained to stop a bleed before anything else. Then she started on the left. Commander Oru arrived 2 minutes later with the emergency team behind him. He took in the sealed bay, the Kethari personnel being checked by medical staff, the 2 humans sitting on the corridor floor. He looked at the bay door. He looked at the actuator housing the warp track, the scrape marks where something had been forced through a mechanical bind by raw pressure. He looked at Rail. Rail looked back from the floor. His shoulder hurt in a specific and serious way. He was tired. He had nothing prepared to say. Oru said, I will need your training schedule. Rail blinked once. I'll send it this afternoon. Oru looked at the door again. Then he moved to help coordinate the evacuation assessment, and the corridor filled with voices, and somewhere down the hall a Kethari medic was arguing with a station computer about sealing protocols. Liz finished wrapping her left hand. She looked at the bandaging, flexed her fingers once to test it. That was heavier than it looked, Rail said. You think, she said. He almost laughed. It hurt his shoulder, so he stopped. But it was close. 2 months passed the way time passes on a station, not by weather or season, but by shift cycles and meal rotations, and the slow accumulation of small events that settle into routine. Rail's shoulder took 5 weeks to clear medical. He spent the first 2 doing light work with one arm and answering Oru's questions about the joint operations document Oru had asked him to write. He spent weeks 3 and 4 writing it. He spent week 5 arguing, politely, with a physiotherapist who had very clear opinions about what cleared for training meant versus what Rail thought it meant. They reached an agreement at 80% load. He was at 80% now. He moved through the ring's morning session with the careful attention of someone who knows exactly where their limit is and has decided not to find it again today. Liz was at full capacity. She had not mentioned this to him. He had not asked. Dreth came to the observation alcove on Tuesdays and Fridays. He had been given official clearance after Oru forwarded his 11-page report to Admiral Vorn with a note attached that said, simply, read the methodology section. Dreth brought his notebook every time. It was a Dovin notebook, light paper, thin cover, about 80 grams. He had learned, after the first visit, to set it on the rail ledge rather than the composite shelf below, and he was very careful about where he put his writing pen. Rail had not said anything about this. He did not need to. Garo had been reassigned to a posting on the outer transit station near the 3rd relay point. The official reason was routine rotation. Nobody asked follow-up questions. He had left without a formal farewell, which was unusual for a diplomat, but these things happened. His aides had gone with him. The briefing room table on Deck 6 had been replaced thicker panels, different composite grade, no note in the work order about why. The joint protocol document had gone to Orus' office on a Tuesday. It was 4 pages covering human compact cooperation in structural emergency scenarios, how to communicate load requirements across species lines, what human personnel could and could not be expected to manage, what compact personnel should do when working alongside humans in a crisis. It was not dramatic. It read like a maintenance checklist, which was intentional. Rail had found that things which read like maintenance checklists got used. Things that read like they were important got filed. Oru had read it twice and approved it without changes, which was the first time he had done that with any human-submitted document. On the Tuesday of the 7th week, Dreth found Rail after the session ended. He had his notebook open to a page dense with numbers and small diagrams. He set the notebook on the rail between them carefully, with 2 hands, and pointed to a calculation in the lower third. "Check my math," he said. Rail looked at it. It was a force distribution model, what happened to a station floor section under repeated high mass impact over time. Not a single event. Cumulative. Long-term. The kind of math that told you not whether a floor could survive something, but whether the floor would be the same floor afterward. Rail read through it. He found one number in the 3rd line and wrote a correction in the margin. Dreth looked at it, wrote the correction into his own column, and nodded. "I have been thinking," Dreth said, "about what you told me. That the training is what you chose to add. That gravity shaped you, but you shaped the rest." Rail was wiping down the bar he had been using. He set the cloth aside. "Yeah, I think I understand it now," Dreth said. "But I did not understand it then. I thought physical capacity was something a species had or did not have. A fact about the body. Fixed. Most people think that," Rail said. "You do not seem bothered by that." Rail shrugged with one shoulder, the working one. "People update when they have a reason to. You updated." Dreth considered this. He looked down into the ring, where Liz was walking the floor, not training now, just cooling down, moving at a pace that was still faster than most compact personnel moved when they were trying. "What made you want to do this?" "The training program. Spending your time on a station teaching people to lift things." Rail thought about the deep space mines, about the kind of emergencies that happened in places where no one was coming quickly, and the thing that stood between you and a very bad outcome was the person standing next to you and what that person could do. About how many times a body's capability had been the deciding factor in a way that no amount of good equipment or good planning had been able to replace. He said, "I've worked in places where the gravity doesn't care how small your species is, where a bad day is just physics, and physics doesn't negotiate. And I've seen what happens when the person next to you can handle it, and when they can't." He paused. "I'd rather be somewhere the people next to me can handle it." Dreth wrote something in the margin of his notebook. He looked at it. He said, "That is a good reason." They stood there for a moment. Below, Liz had stopped in the center of the ring. She was looking at the floor near the far wall, the spot where the old dent had been, months ago, from the fallen weight plate. It had been patched. Station maintenance had filled it, smoothed it, re-sealed the surface. The composite was flush. The color matched. A careful job. You would not know it was there unless you knew. Liz knew. She looked at it for 1 second, then kept walking. Rail watched her. He did not say anything. Dreth closed his notebook, said he would see Rail on Friday, and left the alcove. His footsteps faded down the access corridor. Rail stayed a moment longer. He watched Liz finish her cool-down lap and duck through the inner door at the far end. The ring continued turning. It did not stop for shift changes or protocol documents or diplomatic reassignments. It turned at the same speed it always had, keeping its single constant pressure, the same weight it had always held. He thought about the pen, the table, the panel that had needed to be moved and had been moved, the shoulder that had needed to heal and had healed, the floor that recorded everything and said nothing. He went through the inner door, and the ring kept turning behind him, and the corridor outside smelled like every species on the station all at once, and Rail had stopped noticing that a long time ago. He kept walking.